New developments in the investigation into the death of 18-year-old Nolan Wells, whose body was found off the Mississippi coast.
That case is now set to go to a grand jury.
For 2 weeks, a mother didn't know her son's last words. For 2 weeks, she didn't know if the girl he spent his final hours with even existed. For 2 weeks, the public knew almost everything about Nolan Wells' disappearance, except the one detail that might have explained what actually happened. Tonight, that changes. Katie's name is finally out. Her story is finally on record, and it doesn't match what his 4 friends told investigators. One account says Nolan was heading back to the boat. The other says he chose to stay behind alone on that island. One of them is lying about the last words her son ever spoke. And for Christine Wells, a mother who has spent every single day since July 4th trying to understand how her son ended up in the water, that single contradiction has become impossible to ignore. But that's not where this story actually starts. It starts on the night Nolan went missing. A night that for Christine was already becoming a parent's worst nightmare. A night that somehow got worse before it got better. Nolan Wells was 18 years old, a football player, the kind of young man his coaches would later describe as steady, quiet, the type who led by example rather than by words. On July 3rd, the night before the trip, Christine made salmon for dinner. Nolan told her he was heading out to spend the night with friends before the holiday weekend. He said simply, "Hey Mom, I'm about to go. I love you." A hug, a kiss. He left. That was the last ordinary moment they ever had. The last goodbye she ever got to give him without knowing it was goodbye. The next morning, July 4th, that same group of friends picked Nolan up. 4 young men and Nolan. 5 people on a boat headed to Horn Island. 4 of them came back. Now imagine the moment Christine found out he was missing. Imagine the phone call. Imagine the terror of not knowing where your son is. Imagine the confusion of people around you trying to piece together what happened when nobody actually knows. In that chaos, in that fear, someone mentioned that Nolan had wanted to stay behind. He wanted to spend time with a girl named Katie. And then, almost in the same breath, came a detail that doubled the fear. Katie might be missing too. Nobody on that call knew who she was. Nobody had a last name. Nobody knew how to reach her. For a mother already sick with worry, already imagining the worst, that single moment became something almost unbearable. Not 1 missing child, 2, 1 she knew, 1 she didn't even know the name of. Think about what that does to a parent. Think about the fear of suddenly having twice as much to worry about. That fear sat with Christine Wells for days before it was resolved. Katie was not missing. She had gone home safely that day on a separate boat and had been reachable the entire time. But for those days, Christine didn't know that. She was carrying the weight of searching for a son she couldn't find and a girl she couldn't even identify. When confirmation finally came, it didn't come from investigators. It came from Katie's own mother, a woman named Gracie McCormack, who stepped forward publicly to correct the record. In a social media post, McCormack confirmed what should have been established immediately. Yes, her daughter had been on Horn Island that day. Yes, she had spent time with Nolan before he disappeared. Yes, the 2 of them parted ways sometime that afternoon. According to McCormack, Katie has no knowledge of what happened to Nolan after that moment. She said goodbye, she boarded a different boat. She went home safe. But in doing so, McCormack also introduced the piece of this case that may matter more than anything else. Because underneath that simple sequence of events sits a contradiction that Nolan's own family says they cannot reconcile no matter how many times they've gone over it. Hit the subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Because what we're about to walk through is the evidence that might actually answer which account is true. Subscribe now. According to attorney Ben Crump, who has been working directly with the Wells family since the beginning, Katie's account of that final conversation is specific, and it hasn't changed. She says Nolan told her he intended to rejoin his friends. He planned to get back on the boat with them before they left the island. He was leaving. That is not what his 4 friends say happened. According to them, Nolan chose to stay behind. He wanted to remain on the island and spend more time with Katie. He told them this plainly, in his own words. They left without him. 2 accounts, 2 completely different versions of the same handful of minutes, and they cannot both be true. Think about what each version means for this family. If Katie is telling the truth, then Nolan intended to come back to that boat. He had a plan. He meant to return, which raises an immediate and devastating question. If he meant to come back, what happened in the gap between that intention and the moment his friends left the island without him? Something interrupted a plan. Something changed. Something nobody has been able to explain. If his friends are telling the truth, then Nolan made a conscious choice to stay behind alone on a remote barrier island as the only boat capable of taking him home pulled away from the shore. And that raises a different question, equally devastating. What happened to him afterward? Alone, without the group he had spent the entire holiday with? Neither version has been proven, neither has been disproven. What exists right now is simply a disagreement spoken by two different people who were both present for at least part of that conversation. Two people who knew Nolan, two accounts that do not match. For Nolan's parents, that disagreement has become one of the hardest parts of this entire case. It is not a rumor from a stranger online. It is not a piece of manipulated video or a misdated photograph, easily checked and easily dismissed. It is two first-hand accounts from two people who actually knew their son, describing his final documented words in two ways that simply do not match. And because of that contradiction, because of that single unresolved moment, Christine and Elmore Wells have spent weeks unable to know which version represents their son's actual choice. But there's something else that happened in those earliest days that shaped this entire case. While Katie sat invisible to the public, her account unheard, the internet built entire theories about Nolan's death on top of information that was never true to begin with. The first was a photograph. In the days after Nolan's body was found, an image began circulating online showing him at a pool party surrounded by smiling people. To the people who saw it, the implication seemed obvious. If this photo was recent, it meant Nolan had been alive and well after July 4th. For a brief, disorienting window, people online genuinely believed Nolan might still be alive, and they shared that hope and that false theory with a family who had already buried their son. For a period of time, that's exactly what many people believed. Rolling Stone reviewed the image, examining the metadata, comparing photos taken during the same event. A friend of Nolan's, Trayson Shepard, confirmed what the metadata showed. The photo had been taken on June 27th, a full week before Nolan ever went to Horn Island. It was simply uploaded to social media later on July 5th, which caused the confusion. But by then, the damage was done. A grieving family had to watch strangers build theories about their son's death on top of false hope they never should have had to experience. The second piece of viral evidence was a video. A recording surfaced showing someone yelling near the water on Horn Island. And for a period of time, that recording was widely believed to capture Nolan himself in a heated exchange in what many assumed were among his final moments. Given how little verified information existed about his final hours, this recording took on outsized significance almost immediately, treated online as though it were the missing piece of the entire case. Trayson Shepard addressed this directly. The voice on that recording was not Nolan's, it was his own. Both of these pieces of evidence have since been set aside by credible reporting. But they shaped what millions of people believed about Nolan's death long before anyone actually checked whether they were true. And that's the pattern that's been repeating throughout this case. Unverified information moving faster than facts, theories spreading faster than truth. Now there's the phone. Since the earliest days after Nolan's disappearance, his family has pointed to his cell phone as something they believe may hold real answers about his final hours. A small object that has taken on enormous weight for a mother and father desperate to understand what happened to their son. Nolan posted to Snapchat almost every single day. It was a habit so consistent nobody even thought about it, until it stopped. In the 24 hours before he disappeared, that activity went completely silent. No updates, no posts. A silence that everyone close to him says was simply not like him. When the phone was finally located, one more inconsistency surfaced. The location tied to the account didn't even match where the phone itself was actually found. Someone had accessed that phone, someone had been on it, and potentially, someone had deleted things from it before Nolan's family ever got to see what was on that device. For 2 weeks, that phone sat in a kind of limbo. recovered by the family, referenced repeatedly by their attorney as significant, but not yet examined in a way that satisfied both sides of this investigation. At the July 15th press conference, Ben Crump announced that the family and law enforcement had reached an agreement. A joint inspection of the cell phone conducted together. Experts from both sides working alongside each other, examining the exact same piece of evidence together rather than in parallel. For the first time since Nolan disappeared, the family's investigation and the official one are positioned to look at the same physical evidence at the same time. Attorney Eric Hers was named to lead that effort on the family's side, working with former law enforcement professionals brought in specifically to handle the technical work. But here's the thing, as of right now, that joint inspection still hasn't happened. The family is still waiting. Weeks after the agreement was made, weeks after announcing this would happen, the phone that might hold the answers remains unexamined. No one has explained why. No one has explained the delay. Nolan's parents are still waiting the way they have been waiting since the night their son didn't come home. Waiting on a search, waiting on a coroner, waiting on an autopsy, waiting on a meeting with the district attorney, and now waiting on a phone. Each piece of this case has arrived slowly on its own timeline, and each time this family has had no choice but to wait for it. There is also the matter of the FBI. Rumors had circulated online suggesting the Bureau had taken over the investigation entirely, that federal agents were now running the case in place of local authorities. That is not accurate, and it is important to correct it clearly. According to an official statement from FBI Jackson, the Bureau has assisted the Jackson County Sheriff's Office with certain specific aspects of the investigation. Part of that assistance has centered on threats made against individuals connected to this case. Threats that, because they cross state lines, fall under federal jurisdiction. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office remains the lead agency on this investigation from beginning to end. The FBI's role is supportive, not command. That distinction matters for a family that deserves an accurate account of who exactly is working to bring them answers. This case is not finished. It remains active in every sense that matters. The grand jury process has not concluded. The joint inspection of Nolan's phone has been agreed to, but has not yet taken place. The contradiction at the center of his final hour on that island remains unresolved by anyone with the authority to resolve it. What we've laid out tonight is not speculation. It's not the version that went viral or the version built on assumption. It's what has actually been confirmed by name, by record, by verified reporting. It is in many ways the very least a family like this one deserves. A version of their son's story told with care rather than told for clicks. A version that acknowledges the grief underneath every headline. A version that respects the fact that somewhere in Ocean Springs, a mother is still planning a service for a son she still doesn't fully understand losing. A father is still replaying a conversation he overheard. And a young woman named Katie, who never asked to become part of a national story, is living with the knowledge that her final conversation with Nolan Wells has become one of the most scrutinized exchanges in the country. Even though by every account she has done nothing but tell investigators what she remembers. We're going to keep following this story. When the phone inspection finally happens, we'll tell you what's on it. When the grand jury convenes, we'll break down what happens next. When answers actually arrive, we'll bring them verified and not a moment before. This family has waited long enough for half-truths. They deserve nothing less than the full story told accurately. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next update when it breaks. Thank you so much for joining us. See you next time.